So what we're going to talk about for the next few weeks, and I really wasn't planning on spending a few weeks about it, but the more I've been learning it, I feel that there's a hechach, there's a need to discuss this more than what I originally thought. See, we live in a crazy generation, one whose hashkafot, whose ideologies have been decided by the street, not by the HaShamayim, have been decided by people who are not broad-minded, but rather very narrow-minded. I'm not mentioning here an entire world of Sephardic hashkafa that went down the drain. To replace it, in the words of Obi Yosef Kapach, it was replaced with an inferior ideology, not an equal ideology, with an inferior ideology. But I'm not here talking between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, rather between certain approaches that exist in the Jewish world. We just finished in the Kuzari the discussion between the king and the rabbi about the importance of living in the land of Israel. One who doesn't understand how central living in Eretz Israel is to our Torah is mistaken, is blind. And I told you this in the beginning of that course, that I feel like a fool sitting in San Diego talking to the importance of living in Eretz Israel. But I do that with a lot of regret, and I'll do that with a lot of busha, just like the rabbi tells the king, "You've embarrassed me, king of Kuzari." I'm talking to you about how important it is to live in Israel, and I'm living in Kuzari. What can I do though? I have to teach what the Torah says, and B'ezrat Hashem, I will merit once again, like I used to, I'll merit to fulfill that dream of the halakha, the mitzvah of living in Eretz Israel. Right now though, it's important for me as a rabbi to attack the ideology which attacks the mitzvah of living in Eretz Israel. See, very few movements exist which are there to destroy the mitzvot. But this movement that exists in the religious community, I'm not here talking about the secular community, of Jews against Jews living in Eretz Israel, Jews against Jews having a state of Israel. Call it, for the sake of street lingo, anti-Zionistic religious Jews. This ideology directly contradicts what's written in the Torah Kedusha. It directly contradicts what is at the foundation of our faith. And there's a new thing today in the world when I notice people, they don't want to get caught being anti-Zionists. So they have these terms, I'm a non-Zionist, or we're passive Zionists, or, we love Israel, but we don't believe it has religious significance to us, and so on and so forth. The majority of Orthodox Jews in the world, especially in this city, are not, let's be carefully, I'm not talking about whether they visit the Kotel, they go to Bar Mitzvahs, ideologically. They do not believe that the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 has any religious significance whatsoever. The majority. In fact, we may be one of two, if I were pushing ourselves, 3 Batei Knesset in this city, which don't ask them politically, religiously celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day, as a Jewish holiday. That means that if you go to 99% of the Batei Knesset in San Diego, and you walk in there on Yom HaAtzmaut morning, it's going to look like every other morning of the year.
What's the other one?
I can't have on camera, I'm going to be careful. It's very important. A person must know these things. Haram Peretz, when I was with him in Israel last summer, he told me if a person comes to your Batei Knesset and he says, I reject the state of Israel, I'm a religious guy with a kippah, tzitzit, peot, state of Israel not important to me. He says, don't count him for a minyan. He's a kofer b'hashgachat haboret barach. He says, I laughed. He said, I'm not making fun. He said, he is going against the fact that Hashem controls the world. Hashem created for us the state of Israel. Hashem gave us the state of Israel. Who are you to decide that it's not important? Unless you wish to be a heretic in the favors which HaKadosh Baruch Hu did us. It's very simple. The problem is, really, I should finish now. Now we're done. I should say, okay, I say what I said. Every bracha in the world, Eretz, everything's about the land of Israel. I should be done. You pray 3 times a day. Take us back to Israel, take us back to Israel, back to Israel. Mm-hmm. Now someone says, he took us back to Israel. No. In the words of one rabbi, it's a maaseh satan. It's the act of the Satan. For God's sake. That's how you speak about a gift that God gave us. I'm not a fool. I know the problems that exist in the state of Israel. There are a lot of shadows and darkness in the founding of the state of Israel. People who are against Torah mitzvot, people who hurt the Jewish people also, and help the Jewish people. I'm not blind to this. No, thank you. But rather, in the words of one of the Chachamim, wherever there is shade, that means there must also be light. You can't have shade without light. And it's your choice. Are you focusing on the shade or are you focusing on the light? That's up to you. And we, Baruch Hashem, We, Baruch Hashem, choose to be from those people who focus on the light. They're not focused on the shade. And when it comes closer to Yom HaTzmaut and to that time of the year, you'll hear more shiurim from me in the importance of the celebration of the State of Israel. But for right now, I told you about street ideologies. Before the Holocaust, the vast majority, not everyone, but the vast majority of Ashkenazi Talmidei Chachamim who are mention-worthy were anti-Zionists. What I mean vast majority? Pick a name. You'll find it. The most vocal among them was a man by the name of the Satmar Rebbe, Alev Shalom. Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum. He wrote a book after the war, after the Holocaust, called Vayoel Moshe. And this book is all about the 3 vows, which I'll explain to you in a second, and how it's forbidden for Jews to go to Israel and found the state of Israel before the coming of the Mashiach. Really, the only opposite you had to the Satmar Rebbe was Rav Kook, Alav Shalom, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel. Much of the Jewish community stayed silent. The Sephardic community, because we were Zionists in our blood, we didn't feel the need to get involved in this ridiculous war about whether or not Israel is important. For us, it was important, and we voted with our feet. The majority of Jews who left Sephardic countries went to Israel. It's the reason why in Israel, the predominant Jewish culture, even if it's not ethnic, it's Sephardic. Slichot, they're Sephardic. Shabbat's on a Sephardic. Go to an army base on a Shabbat. The song to sing. In America, the predominant culture is Ashkenazi. This is where the majority of the Ashkenazi Jewish community came. And those who know Sephardic Jews in America, it's far and few in between. But we feel the pressure of that. We feel the hardship of that. In the Ashkenazi community, most rabbis didn't write against the Satmar Rebbe because they agreed. Some because they agreed, and others because they were afraid. He was a very... everyone who disagreed with him was considered an epikoros, a heretic. And third, because some of them didn't feel the need to engage him in this conversation. Unfortunately, the silence of the Ashkenazi rabbis and the silence of the Sephardic rabbis led to what we have today. And that is essentially when people in the religious community think about Zionism, whether they are Satmar or not. Satmar is a small Hasidic group. I mean, compared to the rest of the Jewish people. They might be big compared to other Hasiduyot. Their ideology has permeated the Jewish community to the point well, we already have this in our mind that the state of Israel is not religious, it's not necessarily a good thing. You can't build the state of Israel before the Mashiach comes, blah, blah, blah. This is already the ideology in the Orthodox Jewish community. Like it or not, this is the truth. And because it has spread so far, and has contaminated so many places, we have an obligation to address this issue, and to address it correctly, ideologically, point by point, like you would with any other halakha. So maybe we'll start in a place which is very interesting. We'll start in a Gemara. If you want to find this Gemara, it's a Masechet Ketubot in page 111. If you have Sephardia, you can find it. Page 111a.
Masechet what?
Masechet Ketubot.
Oh.
Like a ketubah that you sign at the wedding. Rabbi Zera learns out, there's a Chacham, Rabbi Zera, we spoke about him in the Kuzari recently. Rabbi Zera says there are 3 Shvuot you find inside of Shir HaShamayim. Hishbati etchem benot Yerushalayim. I made you swear the daughters of Yerushalayim, right? Rabbi Zera says, why is it swearing? What are you swearing about? What's the oath that we took? He says, Rabbi Zera, Gimel Shvuot halalu, there are 3 Shvuot. 3 vows that we took. Achat, the first one, Shelo Ya'alu Yisrael b'choma. That the Jewish people should not go up like a choma, like a wall, to take over the land of Israel. Rashi explains, Yachad, Biad Chazakah. The Jewish people can't come all together with a mighty hand and take over the land of Israel. Achat, the second one, Sheshbiya Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael Shelo Yimredu b'umot ha'olam. Hashem commanded the Jewish people not to rebel against the nations of the world. Not to fight them. You're in the galut. You're in exile. Don't fight the nations of the world. This is where you belong. V'achat, and the third one, Bia Kadosh Baruch Hu et hagoyim, that Hashem commanded the non-Jews, shelo yishtabdu bahen b'Yisrael yoter midai. That they should not oppress the Jewish people too much. Hashem commanded the non-Jews, don't hurt the Jews too much. Galut, yes, but too much, no.
Yeah, understandable. But what about in Eretz Israel?
The Gemara has a few other There are other opinions here that add shaloi galut aketz, that we should not reveal the Mashiach before its time. Shaloi rachaku et aketz. Some say shaloi tchaku et aketz, that we should not push off the redemption. It's interesting what that means. I'm going to leave those alone. Essentially, the Satmar Rebbe believed that these three vows, that we cannot go to Israel, we cannot rebel against the nations of the world, and they shouldn't oppress us too much, that these are binding on the Jewish people, and going to the land of Israel, and fighting with the British, and fighting with the Arabs, and establishing the state of Israel, and getting ourselves out of Galut as a direct rebellion against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sounds good, no? That's what it says in the Gemara. He's not wrong.
But what about when the 12 spies went to see this land of Eretz Israel?
Here, that's before Galut. Here we're talking about after Galut. We're in Galut.
Okay.
We're exiled.
All right, yeah. Sorry.
See, here's problem number one. Problem number one is every halakha in the Talmud, every teaching in the Talmud only becomes halakha when one of the poskim, the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, they make it a halakha. There's a lot of things written inside of the Gemara. Not everything written in the Gemara is ruled by the Chachamim as a halakha. This piece is not ruled the halakha. You're not going to find these three rules in the Rambam. You're not going to find them in the Tur. You're not going to find them in Shulchan Aruch. You're not going to find them anywhere. For some reason, the Chachamim all read this Gemara and said, oh, but it's not important enough to rule it as a halakha. So, just for me to start with you, the Satmar Rebbe bases his entire philosophy on something that is not even a halakha.
So that was an opinion.
But doesn't it? What's like the precedent for going to Israel then? Because I don't know this is a philosophy, but you can imagine that everyone believes in coming to Mashiach, rebuilding Jerusalem, all that.
When the Mashiach comes.
Okay.
I mean, sit like sitting ducks in Galut until the Mashiach comes and saves you. There was the opposition of many rabbis before the Holocaust to leave when there was a Holocaust happening. Wait for the Mashiach.
Wow.
There were many rabbis, you should see, screaming their Hasidim, don't go to Israel! Stay here!
Doesn't Bnei Yerushalayim come before Matzmiach Keren Yeshua in Amida?
Listen, the amount of sources that show that you have to rebuild Jerusalem before the Mashiach comes are too many to count. It's obvious. The overwhelming, though, orthodox ideology, I use that word very lightly, is that you have to wait for some fantastical Mashiach to happen before you can do everything. That's the premise that everybody works on. That obviously is a big ideology. We don't believe that the Mashiach is going to build a Beit HaMikdash. We believe that way. We're going to build a Beit HaMikdash and Mashiach will come. It says in the Tanat of Eliyahu, the book of Eliyahu Navi, it says, 3 days before Melech HaMashiach Ba, before he comes, the King Mashiach, Omed al Gag Beit HaMikdash, he will stand on the roof of the Beit HaMikdash, and he'll call out to the Jewish people and say, Mashiach, it's time for your redemption, the Jewish people. It's time for the Mashiach to come. So tell me, if 3 days before the building of the Beit before the Mashiach comes, Eliyahu Navi stands on the roof of the Beit HaMikdash, what does it tell you?
We know when
That's gonna
The
be.
Beit HaMikdash comes before
yes.
the Mashiach comes.
Yeah.
There are so many sources like this. In fact, the sources that talk about the Beit HaMikdash falling out of the heavens, this is there are sources like that. I'm not going to tell you they're not sources. But it's not our tradition this way. For example, I once heard recently Rabbi Zini, the chief rabbi of the Technion. He's a rabbi, he's a doctor, he's a professor, he's a big Talmid Chacham, North African, from Algeria. He was interviewed on the radio, how this rabbi and that rabbi and next rabbi, they all said you're not allowed to go to the Temple Mount until the Mashiach comes. And he said, what do you want from me? This rabbi is Ashkenazi, this one is Iraqi. They all have a tradition that the Mashiach has to come first before you build the Beit HaMikdash. He said, by our Chachamim, for 2,000 years, thousands of them wrote books. we reject entirely this concept that Mashiach will come before we can go build a Beit HaMikdash. What do you want from me? This is a battle we've been having for thousands of years. We don't believe that the Mashiach will have to build a Beit HaMikdash. To the other way around. And by the way, what's the greatest proof for this? Why would the Rambam list for us how to build a Beit HaMikdash if we don't need to do it? Why would the Rambam waste his paper telling us how to build a third temple if the third temple is going to fall out of the sky?
Because he understands it's not going to fall on the sky.
Our hands are going to build it. Are there opinions? Of course there are opinions otherwise, but everything in Judaism has opinions. You have to sit down with the Tanakh, to sit down with the Mishnah, with the Talmud, and with an oral tradition that we've had for 2,000 years and say, what is our approach? Between the opinions, what do we choose? In every question you have an argument, Kehillat and HaShamayim. Which one is wrong? I'm not going to tell you which one is wrong. I can tell you which one we know we're going to follow. Does it mean the other one's wrong? Chas v'shalom. Who might say the other one's wrong? Just that's not the one we follow. Every halakha in the world is like this. Can you do this on Shabbat? Depends who you ask. But we have a tradition that you can, or that we have a tradition you can. What do you want for this? It's like everything else in the world. But this ideology of a minority Jewish community to affect the way that we view Eretz Yisrael in the redemption and the building of the Beit HaMikdash, who is this ideology? Who are these people that they're going to influence us about how it is that we are supposed to view the Mashiach? How could it be? So I want to tell you that the Satmar Rebbe is not the only one who dealt with this issue. I'm going to deal with his writings because they're the ones that are mostly based on this topic. There was a famous Hasidic rabbi. His name was Rabbi Yisachar Shlomo Teichta. I'll show you his picture. Rabbi Yisachar Shlomo Teichta, he wrote a few books. I have some of his other books at home. He was a Dayan, if I'm not mistaken, in Hungary. And I don't know that he was Satmar, but he was of that same opinion. Anti-Zionism, anti-building the State of Israel. This is before the Holocaust. And he was one of the biggest spokespeople against Jews going back to the land of Israel until the Mashiach comes. And Rabbi Yisachar Shlomo Teichta finds himself halfway through a Holocaust in a ghetto. And he has this crisis where he realizes that everything he had taught his whole life was a mistake. I want to tell you the greatness of Rabbi Yisachar Shlomo Teichta. Because to spend your whole life preaching something, and then to realize you made a mistake, that's really hard enough. But to then tell the whole world that you made a mistake? And he writes a book. This is the handwritten pages from his book. See this? He writes a book of hundreds and hundreds of sources. From Pshat, Tanakh, Mishnah, Talmud, to books of Kabbalah, books of Chassidut. He was a brilliant Chacham. Proving that you must go back to Israel. And you must build the State of Israel. And that we wouldn't be in the situation we were in if we would have listened to this. And this book serves as a cornerstone of a person who knows all the arguments that the other side has to say. And one by one, he disputed them. One by one, he got rid of them. I once bumped into someone, I don't know if it was a grandson or a great-grandson, someone from the family of Yisachar Shlomo Teichta. And he was a Haredi guy, Shaar. I said, wow, how could you be this Haredi? Your grandfather, you know who he was? He said, yeah, our grandfather, he snapped in the Holocaust. He lost his mind in the Holocaust. I mean, the way they dismissed everything he had to say was by saying, he used to be lucid and against Israel and against Zionism, and now, he was in the Holocaust, he lost his brain, lost his mind, and because of that, we disregard everything he wrote. An insane person could write a book like this. A person who's not lucid knows how to take every bit and dissect it and bring out sources. And it's not this book, by the way. You don't have to trust me. This book is written in English. Also, they translated it in English. It's called Habanim Semecha. I recommend that in everybody's library they have a copy. I used to have a copy in English, and someone borrowed it, and for life, I'll never know where it went. M-E-M Habanim Semecha. It's worthwhile. In Hebrew, it's beautiful. In English, it's also. They did a very good job translating it. And the sources, I mean, they really did a good job.
I'm having trouble understanding this. Is it like a situation where there's like a lot of evidence on both sides, and then it's like what your hashkafa is, you fall in line in one direction? Or is it like there's a little bit of evidence for one point and a lot of evidence supporting the other side, and then people are ignorant to, like, what?
It depends who you're going to ask, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you there's a lot of evidence for our side, very little evidence for their side, but the overwhelming majority follows that side. I'm sure they'll say the other way around. The problem is when you wish to reconcile their attitude with the Tanakh, with the Mishnah, with the Talmud, with the the books of our HaShamayim, you have a very hard time. Aside from this one piece of Talmud they're all hanging off of, and this is the one piece of Talmud I told you, it's not mentioned in the Rambam, it's not mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, it's not mentioned anywhere. Aside from this one piece, they don't really have much they're hanging off of. A lot of it, you should know, and maybe this is fair to say, a lot of the opposition in Ashkenaz to the Zionist movement had to do with the fact that a lot of the Zionist movement was built by secular Jews who were automatically identified with those European Jews who were not religious. Reform, whatever, Maskilim, and whatever group you want to tag them onto. And so many rabbis viewed the Zionist movement as just another arm, another branch of the movement of the Haskalah, of the anti-religious movement. It's not accurate, and by the way, it's not even fair, because that story is not true. The first settlers, even from Ashkenaz, who go to Israel, are religious.
Vilna
Yeah,
Gaon,
the
right?
Biluim, right? And the Vilna Gaon, and the students of the Baal Shem Tov. And then you have the people who were dreaming
The first
of...
Moshavot were religious.
Were religious, of course.
Before
But there's
the
two
kibbutzim,
people...
Before the kibbutzim.
Yes, correct. Before the two people have an agenda, though, that the movement should not be religious. That is, the religious community that's anti-Zionist. They don't want you to know that they're religious people. I bought a book recently. It's called Leman Tzion Noach Hashem. For the sake of Zion, I will not be silent. It's written by an Ashkenazi rabbi who came to Israel. He was a student of Rav Kook later in his life, and he was the first Saladatot, the first minister of religion of the state of Israel. In fact, if you see the Declaration of Independence of the state of Israel, he signed on it, and he's the one sitting right next to David Ben Gurion in the first, the picture of all those all the people sitting there and declaring independence. He was there, and he writes a book saying how he was one of the rabbis that was going city to city, village to village in Europe, collecting money for Chovevei Tzion, for the movement of bringing Jews to Israel and founding the state of Israel. And he said, I want to tell you that it's a lie. The majority of Jewish cities that I went to in Ashkenaz were supportive of the state of Israel. The majority. They said, and they're rabbis. And in fact, he said, some of the greatest supporters of the state of Israel were the Hasidim. He said, but, and listen, I'm not saying it. He was from the Hasidic stock, so he said this. He said, the Mitnagdim and the Hasidim differed in one major area. And then for the Hasidim, their major cornerstone of their movement was Ahavat Yisrael, was loving your fellow Jew. And because of that, they were very into helping other Jews, regardless of whether or not they believed in the ideology of those movements. He said it was much more sympathetic for him to come meet with Hasidim than to meet with Mitnagdim. And in fact, it was those who you consider today the most anti-Israel. He said it's a lie. That's a new thing that happened. He said he can tell you that on his bones, when he was in Europe, that was not the attitude. It's a fascinating how history is revisioned, how history is changed. A great example, Chavetz Chaim, alav shalom, the famous Chavetz Chaim.
Yeah.
He was in the first meeting of the Agudat Yisrael. Agudat Yisrael is a movement of ultra-Orthodox rabbis that got together. It was like the first, not international, Ashkenazi Congress of Rabbis. And the Chavetz Chaim was one of the elders, and he was invited there. And the first day that he was there, a group of Agudat Yisrael from Israel, they came, and Palestine at the time, and they spoke bad about Rav Kook. So the Chavetz Chaim stood up and he left. Why? Rav Kook was his student. He sent Rav Kook to Israel. And he left. He wouldn't come back. He boycotted the Congress of Agudat Yisrael. And when this group of Agudat Yisrael, they came to knock on his door because they wanted a blessing before they left, he wouldn't open the door for them. He said he will not open the door for evil people, and that the end of them will be that they will all be destroyed. When I went to yeshiva in Baltimore, so we learned about the first Agudat Yisrael convention. Why was the Chavetz Chaim not there? Because he wasn't feeling well. He came and he wasn't feeling well, and it was so sad that he missed the rest of the convention. But it had nothing to do with Rav Kook. How do you know the story is true? Because we have documents from the Chavetz Chaim where he put out posters decrying the attitude that they had against Rav Kook and said, don't talk about this holy man. We have to sign the Chavetz Chaim. So history is very strong in revision. I cannot tell you who's right and who's wrong. I can just tell you based on our sources what's going on. So maybe today, at least what I can get to, before we start to dissect the Satmar Rebbe's, he has a whole book he wrote. And I have 13 answers collected by a few rabbis in Israel, Rabbi Aviner, Mordechai Tzion, that answer his 13 complaints. 13 answers they give to him. I want to touch a little bit of background about the Satmar Rebbe, who he was, what he was. The real question is, when we talk about the Satmar Rebbe, how much do we have to respect him? The Satmar Rebbe writes about Rav Kook that he calls him an ish tzar ve'oyev hara hazeh. He says he's a wicked and oppressive man, this evil man. We use that term only about Haman. He says, Shehemid Selem Behechal Hashem. He puts idols in the house of Hashem. That's something we talk about the Greeks. He doesn't even call him rabbi. He calls him Hatameh, Hayadua, this impure one that we all know about. That's how he speaks to the Rav Kook. Because he viewed Rav Kook as a Zionist, and he was against this idea. And for him, Rav Kook was nothing.
Although he received help from the Zionists.
Yeah, of course. I'm not
running away from Europe.
Running away from Europe, that's true. That's correct. And so the real question, how much respect do we have to give him back? You see, most rabbis, when they fight. I'm talking about HaShamayim, they argue, but they still, listen, we'll agree to disagree, but we're going to fight forever. Not all rabbis agree with each other. I just have a picture now, Chamor Chayao, Chamor Ovadia Yosef. These two argued probably about everything. But they respected each other, for the most part. There were some outlashes from each other, but they sat next to each other in weddings and drank with each other and wrote to each other. But the Satmar Rebbe's attitude was, if you don't agree with me, you're an epikoros. This is what he would write many times. You're a heretic. If you don't agree with me, you're fighting against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This was his overwhelming attitude, so how much do we have to respect him back? Hey, look at the things he said about us. When the Satmar Rebbe was still in Europe, he came to visit Israel. When he came to visit Israel, Rav Kook invited him to visit him. And he wouldn't visit Rav Kook. And Rav Kook tried a few times to visit him. And finally, when he left Israel, they asked him, why didn't you go visit Rav Kook even once? At least you could argue with him. Fight with him. You know what he said? He said, I don't think I'll be able to change Rav Kook's mind. He said, if anything, I'm afraid he's going to change my mind. Wow. And that's when he got on the boat. And on that boat is when he wrote that letter about Rav Kook. I mean, he was afraid already that Rav Kook would influence him. Wow. And he thought that he would not have a chance to influence Rav Kook back. Many Hasidic rabbis who were anti-Zionist sat with Rav Kook before, but he wouldn't meet him. He was afraid. And you find that Rav Kook, after this letter was written about him, you don't find one letter that he writes about the Satmar Rebbe. Nothing. Not good, not bad. Doesn't talk about him. Rav Tzvi Huda Kook, the son of Rav Kook, I know of one place where he discusses the Satmar Rebbe. There was a big war about how high a mechitza has to be. But Moshe Feinstein said a mechitza, the bare minimum has to be like 10 fists. It's a few feet. Meaning it could be up to here, let's say, and then that's a mechitza. And the Satmar Rebbe said, no, it has to be higher. When they asked Rav Tzvi Huda Kook, he said, listen, I don't agree with the Satmar Rebbe on anything, but on this thing I agree with him. That's the only thing we know that he spoke about him. But never disparaged them, never wrote bad about him. In fact, the one rabbi that I know that knocked Satmar was actually Rabbi Yosef Massas, who was sitting in Morocco. I have letters back and forth. If you read those letters, it's an unbelievable thing. Basically, Rav Yosef Massas was he received a letter from some rabbi in Satmar, in Hungary still. He was sitting in Morocco, or Tunisia, maybe he was already in Algeria. He received a letter saying, we have a Satmar newspaper, a Torah newspaper. It's called Beit Vad Chachamim, a house for the gathering of the Chachamim. Maybe you wish to write an article there. Rav Massas is smart. He already knows why on earth would they reach out to me from Ashkenaz that I should write in their magazine. So he writes back to them and says, are you saying that you want me to pay you to publish my books? I already have enough people to publish my writings. Or are you saying that you're going to want me to send articles and you'll do it for free? He already knew that they might charge him for his favor of writing them articles. And they took his articles, and then he gets in the mail one magazine, and the front cover of it, it's talking about the evil chief rabbi in the land of Israel. Now Rav Massas is a Talmid Chacham. He knows that, listen, maybe it's right. Maybe all the things they're saying about Rav Kook are right. That he doesn't want people to keep Shabbat, that he's an idol worshiper, that all kinds of things they wrote about him. So he reaches out to Rav Kook. We have all the letters. I have a class somewhere on YouTube, maybe on a Monday morning class book. We went through these letters. And he says, Rav Kook, these complaints about you, are they true? And Rav Kook answers each one of them back. And then Rabbi Yosef Massas writes two letters. One back to Rav Kook, in which Rav Kook sent him all his books as a gift. He says, Nitmala'u kol ta'eli bi ora. All the cells in my heart were filled with light when I received your books. Then he calls Rav Kook, and the next letters to him always, HaMelech b'Yerushalayim, the king of Jerusalem. That's what he refers to him as. It's a big chacham. And he apologizes that he called him out on that. And then he writes a letter to this rabbi, I don't remember his name, from the Satmar magazine. and he tells him, Bnei Korach lo metu. The children of Korach have never died, and you are rightfully taken your place as one of the children of Korach. He says, and it's very interesting that of all the places, he said, you have a magazine called Beit Vad Chachamim, the house of the Chachamim. He said, I suggest that you change the name of your magazine to Bet HaKiseh HaMasriach, I think he writes that, the smelly bathroom. And let everyone know that unlike every other house, when you build a house, you put the bathroom in the back of the house so it doesn't smell your house. He said, you fools took the bathroom and you put it right when you walk inside of your house, on the front page. That way, anybody who walks into your house tips over the bucket and all of the house gets dirty. He says, that's what your magazine is like. And he's rims, and you've never seen a person write like this. And at the end, he writes something like a sarcastic language to him. It shows a sense of humor, and then he ends off his letter. And you can imagine that Satmar never asked him for any more articles after this. But Rav Kook himself never spoke bad, and so the attitude of the students of Rav Kook actually is never to speak bad about the Satmar Rebbe. They say about Rav Tzvi Kook that when they were buying books for the library in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav, they asked him, should we buy a book of the Satmar Rebbe? And he said, yeah, a Talmid Chacham wrote a book, you should put it in the library. And then at second thought he said, but don't put it somewhere that everybody could reach it. You know, some people can be influenced by these things, and it's best to put it somewhere. It should be there. But so, you know, we have the Satmar Rebbe book next to the books of Rav Kook, and in there the books of Lubavitch Rebbe. Also, it's all a mix over there. And because listen, at the end of the day, Talmid Chacham wrote a book. It's there. What can you do about it? There's a much sharper letter that was written by Rabbi. He's alive today. You may have heard of him before. I just bought his books for the first time, maybe 3 months ago. It's very hard to find them. It's called Shoot B'nai Banim. B'nai Banim, like the grandsons, is the name of the book. He is a grandson of Rav Henkin, the famous Rav Henkin that lived in the generation of Rav Kook.
Feinstein.
Rav Feinstein, thank you. And his son, you may know, his son was murdered in a terrorist attack maybe 3 years ago on Sukkot. Remember there was a couple walking in the old city, and they were stabbed to death in front of everybody in the shuk was there watching, and nobody helped them. His name was Rav Tam Hagen. She made like some decoration for the sukkah. You may know that they put in a lot of sukkot now. He was a young Talmid Chacham, wrote tremendous Torah commentaries on halakha and things like that. Even my wife's Chassidut, the Stoliner Chassidim, they used to print his articles inside of there. He was a religious Zionist Talmid Chacham, but in their books they always print his articles. He was a big Talmid Chacham. So this is his father that I'm talking about. His father was asked, and he was very careful not to mention the name of the Satmar Rebbe, but it's obvious when you read his letter. The question is, do we have to respect the Satmar Rebbe? We used to call him Harav, Hagon, Zatzal, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He says, but then we read his books, and actually, he says that we're all going to Gehinnom, that we're all evil people, and that we don't have a portion of the world to come, so why should we respect him back? And he writes the first thing. The first thing is, when it says that you have to respect the Talmid Chacham, how much do you have to respect the Talmid Chacham? And he says that really, that writing a first title and a last title, Zatzal, this is only about your rabbi, the rabbi that you learned your Torah from. But other Chachamim, you don't have to give them all of that respect. You simply have to treat them with, meaning Rabbi so-and-so. I was once in a Chabad yeshiva, and they were talking about Rav Shach, and it's obvious for you that the Chabad and Rav Shach fought a lot with each other. And they didn't want to call him Rav Shach, they called him Shach, the Shach, like this, with a hand like that. Don't worry, and this is because Lubavitch will be the same way in the other direction. It's not one way. He said, listen, you could say all you want. You could be from the greatest students of Rav Shach, but how can you say Lubavitch, you're just a, what do you call it, his first name? You went to school with him? The Shach, what, he played football with you? He's Talmid Chacham. You can believe that Talmid Chacham made a mistake, but how dare you take away the fact that he's Talmid Chacham? Why does it have to be that to disagree with somebody, they can't be worth anything? Our parents a lot quotes Chachamim. I once asked him, I said, but you quoted this Chacham, you hold of this Chacham? He said, I have no idea who he is. I saw his book, he said something true, I accept the truth from anybody who says it, and I quote it in my book. Why is that something bad? It's so hard to do that today. Somebody got upset at me that in one of my videos I quoted Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Why Rav Chaim Kanievsky says you have to break the iPhones? I said, listen, I didn't quote Rav Chaim Kanievsky about breaking iPhones. I quoted Rav Chaim Kanievsky because he said something brilliant in Torah that I felt was appropriate to share. I don't understand why that has to be a complaint. It's obvious to anybody that I'm not a student of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. This goes in many directions, but that kind of attitude doesn't exist anymore. Technically, though, says Rav Henkin, that the Satmar Rebbe had a shita in the halakha. He clearly felt, according to halakha, whatever halakha he believed in, that if you don't agree with somebody, you can say whatever you want about them. And so technically what he's telling you is if you don't agree with him, you could treat him the same way. Because he wouldn't speak so bad about other Talmidei Chachamim if he felt it was forbidden to speak bad about Talmidei Chachamim. Clearly he felt if you disagree with Talmidei Chacham, you can say whatever you want about him. And he said, my grandfather used to say that if the Satmar Rebbe was alive in the time of the Sanhedrin, they would execute him as one of the elders who rebels against the Sanhedrin. He said, don't think that my grandfather was denigrating the Satmar Rebbe. Lehefech, you have to be a big Talmid Chacham to be considered an elder who rebels against the Sanhedrin. He was telling you, he's a brilliant Talmid Chacham. We're not taking it away from him. But simply, he went against all the other Chachamim in this generation. Is he allowed to? I'm not here to sit. Then he quotes a cute Gemara. It says that the Gemara tells us that you're not allowed to speak bad about a Talmid Chacham. Why? If you see him do something bad in the daytime, don't speak bad about him at night. Why? He says, Shema asa teshuvah. Maybe he did teshuvah. Yeah. He says, Shema asa teshuvah. The Gemara says, for sure he did teshuvah. He says in the Ashkenazi yeshivot, they play with this teaching. They say, it's not that he did teshuvah. If you see a rabbi who did an avera, you can wait, give him a few hours, he's going to write a halachic letter why it's okay for him to do this avera. He asa teshuvah. He made for himself a teshuvah. You know the books of questions and answers. He made a response of why it's okay for him to do an avera. He said, so really the Satmar Rebbe was so convinced that he was right, that what do you want from him? I mean, this is what he... Recently I was giving a shiur in Yerushalayim, and my brother-in-law told me this. He said about the current Satmar Rebbes. He said, they're not Zionists. I said, what do you want from them? The current Satmar Rebbes, they have no choice but to be non-Zionists. He called them a Tinok Shenishma. So they were raised in a house of Satmar, in the house of Satmar, in the house of Satmar. It's not even something they think about. They don't even think about it. They go with the flow of the rest of their Hasidim. I said, that's a problem, though. If they were just a regular Hasid, I don't have complaints on regular Satmar Hasidim. I don't have complaints on regular Reform Jews. It's the people who are leading them, and are leading them incorrectly. That's what I have a complaint on. Don't call yourself a leader if you follow everybody like sheep. You can't be. You can be a regular person, but a leader you can't be when you follow everybody else. Maybe I'll show you one last piece. He ends off his conclusion of Rav Henkin. It's very interesting. Rav Henkin says, ולייסר בדברים, you can't speak bad, אי אפשר, גם בחיי הרבי מסעד, מעובדה שלחם אותו. You can't actually speak bad about him. Why? שאין לנו הכוח להעמיד בכל מקום את הדת על תילה, ולכן מכל מקום אסור לבזותו, ולא בחייו, ובוודאי שלחם אותו. We shouldn't denigrate him because we don't have the power like the old בתי דין. We could force a person to follow halakha. We can't. אבל, listen to this, מכיוון שתלמידיו למדים מדבריו לבזות יראים ושלמים כמו שציטטת מדבריהם, but because his students have learned his way, that you can put down all the chachamim that disagree with your rabbi, פשט הנגע הזה למחלוק בבנותינו, and unfortunately this attitude spread beyond the yeshivot of Satmar, that anyone who is a Zionist, they speak bad about him. In fact, Harav Peretz was once in the Beit HaKnesset of one of his sons, and he was giving a drasha all about Israel and the importance of living in Israel. And he got down, and his son told him, Abba, if you would have spoken for 5 more minutes, I would make you come down from the podium. How can you be such a Zionist in front of all these religious people? It's dangerous. He said, therefore, asur lechlok lo kavod. You also shouldn't respect him. Don't publicly respect the Satmar Rebbe. Sheken ze mechazek et yidei hamevazim v'gorem chil Hashem nosaf. Because what you're doing by respecting him is telling his students that he was a very righteous man. And then they're going to learn, oh, see, even he says that he's a righteous man. And therefore, barech lo tevarchenu v'gam kalel lo tekalelenu. Don't bless him, don't curse him, just ignore it. Don't talk about it so much. That's why here, I don't want to discuss so much the personality of that Admor Satmar. I wish to discuss the shita that he had, the approach that he had. In the next few weeks, I hope to go through all of these opinions. Maybe let me just start you off. So we learned the Gemara already. The Gemara says there are 3 oaths. What are the 3 vows that we took? I don't know, an oath, a vow, I don't know what that is. The first one, that we won't go up to Israel, bechoma. What is bechoma? What do we translate? What did Rashi say?
There's a wall.
As a wall. Together and with strength. Yes? The second,
To fight.
that we won't fight the Goyim. We won't rebel against them. Correct? And what do we say the third was? That they also took a promise. What was their promise? Not to oppress us too much. That word too much is hurtful. That's like, they could oppress us, but not too much. And we mentioned in the halakha, nobody quotes this piece of Talmud. So we're going to have to deal with that as well. But let me go with you just through some of the, what they call Rashi Prakim. This book here was written by one of Rabbi Ner's students, Rabbi Mordechai Tzion. And it goes through the whole book of the Satmar Rebbe. He always quotes from the Satmar Rebbe with a lot of humility. Rabbeinu, our rabbi, our rabbi. He's not a rabbi, but our rabbi. And then he argues every point. Cold, calm, logically, and shows that it doesn't have a backing. It's not necessary to hold it. There's a big chacham. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak Leon. He wrote a book. The book is called Megillat Esther. It's not actually the Megillat Esther. It's a famous book you once mentioned in a shiur. He is the rabbi who mentions the Rambam doesn't count living in the land of Israel as one of the 630 mitzvot. Let me read you his words. He says, "Shemitzvat Yerushat haaretz lo nahaga rak bimei Moshe v'Yoshua v'David." The mitzvah of conquering the land of Israel only existed in the times of Moshe, Yehoshua, up until David HaMelech. V'kol zman shelo galu me'aratzam, and so long as the Jewish people were not exiled from their land. Aval achar shegalu ma'al admatam, but once the Jewish people were sent at the galut, en mitzvah zo noheget לדורות ad et bo HaMashiach. This mitzvah is not applicable anymore until the time of the coming of the Mashiach. Ki adraba, to the contrary. Nitztavenu lefi ma she'amru besof ketubot, were commanded based on what they said in Masechet Ketubot here that I quoted to you, shelo nimrod be'umot, that we shouldn't rebel against the nations, lalecha dichbosh et haaretz b'chazaka, to go and conquer the land of Israel with strength. Uma she'amar HaRamban, and that which the Ramban says, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, not the Rambam, what he says, שחכמים אמרו כי כיבוש הארץ היא מלחמת מצווה, זהו כאשר לא נהיה משובדים לאומות. That which the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman says that we have a mitzvah to conquer the land of Israel, that's only when we're not under the hands of the Goyim. But when we're in Galut, we don't have that mitzvah anymore. By the way, the Ramban is actually one of those who count among the 600 mitzvot, not just to live in Israel, but that we have a mitzvah in every generation to go back to Eretz Israel and to free the land of Israel from the hands of people who are not Bnei Brit, that are not the children of Israel. So you have here like almost two contradictory opinions. And the way he's explaining it in Megillat Esther is that until the Mashiach comes, from when we exiled until the Mashiach comes, we don't have a mitzvah anymore of living in the land of Israel, of conquering the land of Israel. I mean, he doesn't count this as a mitzvah. I want to tell you what the 13 answers are, and then we'll go through them in circles. So now I'll tell you the 13 answers. We'll end the class, and next week we'll start taking them apart. The first of the 13 answers, the wall fell. Which wall? The wall that stops us from going to the land of Israel, that we can't go over this wall to the land of Israel. Who broke that wall? Who allowed Am Yisrael to go home?
After World War II, it was open.
Even before, by the Balfour Declaration, already the non-Jews agreed the Jewish people belong in their homeland. Now, obviously that was full of politics and full of problems and propaganda and agendas, but the bottom line is...
The League of Nations.
What?
The League of Nations.
The League of Nations. And then even after, Baruch was right, after World War II, especially when they voted on the establishment of the State of Israel, the State of Israel was established with a majority vote of the nations of the world. Meaning, the whole reason not to go to Eretz Israel is because the nations don't let us. But the nations let us. And we're going to show you that there are many poskim that actually write that explicitly, hundreds of years ago, that tell us that there will come a time that the nations will let us go, and then the Shua falls apart. Second, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a sign that it's time to go home, we're allowed to go home. Which sign did Hashem give us? There are a few signs. By the way, the first one is this, that the nations of the world started moving in the direction of letting us go home. The second one is when the nation wakes up. I mean, for 2,000 years we're sitting in Galut, we don't try to go home. All of a sudden the Jewish community, the Jewish people, even those people that really are not so connected to the Jewish people, in their heart, subconsciously, something wakes them up to go home. That itself is a divine sign. 3, when you see what's called HaKetz and Meguleh, the revealed end, which I'll talk about that, and also some say that the tragedies that happen in the Galut are a sign from Hashem that it's time to leave. World War II, what is the worst tragedy we ever went through in our life? And last, there's an interesting, from the students of the Gaon of Vilna, they believe that their rabbi was a spark of Mashiach ben Yosef. Now, I'm not from the students of the Gaon of Vilna, I'm simply telling you that according to them even, once their rabbi came to the world, these three vows went out the window, and that's why you find the students of the Gaon of Vilna actually end up in the land of Israel and try to establish some kind of their own community in Eretz Israel. The third.
Four.
Those were four subcategories of one, of number two. So number three, these are three vows. The first, that we won't go to Israel. The second, we won't rebel against the nations of the world. And the third, that they won't oppress us too much. But there are poskim who write that the moment that they oppress us too much, then the other two go out the window. They broke their end of the deal, so we don't have to hold our end of the deal either. Now, why the Inquisition wasn't too much, I don't know. But definitely the Holocaust is too much. It's too much. A third of Am Yisrael disappeared. It's a crazy number. And therefore, that itself was a reason to go back. 4, how many Jews came back to the land of Israel in 1948? Do you know how many Jews were there in the War of Independence?
600.
600,000.
Whoa,
600,000.
that's trippy.
So how many Jews are there in the world? Let's say,
14.
give me a number.
13,
13, 14,
14.
12. Then you want to say it was a little bit less, 11. Fine. Is that the majority of the Jewish people? We came with a yachad, was together, biyad chazaka. It's not even a kibbutz of Jews that came to Israel. That's not even a city of Jews. In San Diego, even in San Diego, you have 20,000 Jews, 150,000 Jews this year. That's a few times San Diego went to Israel. That's the majority of the Jewish people. I mean, we didn't even violate the Shua. We went step by step, slowly. So now we have a big community of Israel. We didn't all come together. We didn't come biyachad. That's what Rashi says. Biyachad, together. Next. Some say that this wall that we're not allowed to pass was only around Bavel. I mean, we can't go from Babylon to Eretz Israel. But some people say that once we left Bavel, so the Galut officially ended. We were now is in our hands to go to Eretz Israel. 6, the Mekubalim say, and another number of other rabbis, that this prohibition only lasted for 1,000 years. From when it was made, 1,000 years later, and that's it. So it's been over for almost 1,000 years.
Why?
That's what we'll go through next week. We're going to go through all these sources of why. It's a good question, why. And what I'm going to tell you is that not all of these stand up to the test on their own. But when you add 13 things together, in halakha you have a sveka. A double doubt, it already permits a biblical prohibition. This is not even a biblical prohibition, it's not even a rabbinic prohibition. If you have 13 doubts, that's already so many doubts that it could not stand the test of halakha anyways. Some say that the prohibition of going to Israel only applies to building the Beit HaMikdash. But aside from building the Beit HaMikdash, we're allowed to do everything else. The 8th, okay, so some say that the status of the Jews, we'll have to talk about this next week, it's too hard to explain. 9, even in the Gemara itself, the rabbis don't all agree with Rabbi Zera that you can't go to the land of Israel. I mean, even in the Gemara, forget the Poskim, even in the Gemara, not everyone agrees with Rabbi Zera. So this is not even a rule in halakha. Simply, it's an idea that Rabbi Zera brought out. 10, there is an opinion that says that Rabbi Zera himself, who wrote these 3 Shavuot, he took them back. And so even everything that they're basing themselves off of already was gone by Rabbi Zera himself. 11, most of the poskim disagree with Rabbi Leon that I read to you before, the Megillat Esther. Most disagree with him about the fact that there's no mitzvah to go to the land of Israel until the Mashiach comes. 12, this entire section of Talmud is not halachic. It's Agadah. It's the legends of the Talmud. Agadah is not somewhere we learn halakha from. You're not allowed to learn halakha from Agadah. That's a rule all across the Talmud. If you followed every Agadah, the halakha, you'd be in a different religion. So why this is treated seriously by the poskim? It's not. That's why the Rambam doesn't quote, Shulchan doesn't quote it, because it's an Agadah, it's not halakha. Just for that reason alone, how could you hang your whole ideology off of it? And last but not least, and this maybe is the most common sense. You see, wherever you find the simplest, what's that past? You know, they see like, there's a question in the Beit Yosef, I was going to ask about laws of Chanukah. There's 100 answers that are given. So which one is the real answer? Having 100 answers is good, which one's the real answer? This is the simplest answer, the one that's most logical and simple, not so complicated. That's the real answer. This 13th answer says these 3 vows are not halachot. They're not prohibitions. It's not that you cannot go. These are gzerot elohiyot. These are divine decrees. Meaning, so long as the Jewish people are not allowed to go to Eretz Yisrael, no matter what they try, they will not be able to. But the moment they are able to, so obviously we're allowed to. Because these things are not written in Bilashon, it's forbidden. Rather, these are decrees on the Jewish people. I made you promise. Hashem, when He's ready, He'll get rid of those things. And if it happened, then that's already a sign that it was ready. But Hashem, next week, and perhaps just maybe one more week after that, I hope to go through these with the Mifashim, with the Puskim in detail, with the commentaries that discuss them, so you could see that there's a lot of depth to this. And what you'll realize in general over this conversation is this attitude that we have, that the religious community was not a Zionist community, is a mistake. When I was speaking about Rav Kook, our parents didn't grow up in the world of Rav Kook, but I once bought him the diary of Rav Kook, and the next morning I stayed up the whole night reading the diary of Rav Kook. And he told me that he remembers that in Ponovich, in Bnei Brak, they had the whole library of Rav Kook there. I said, "You think it's still there?" He said, "When he went back once, he saw that it was gone already." I said, "What do you make of that?" He said, "The Orthodox community has been taken over by a very small fringe group who have literally dictated for the rest of us how it is that Judaism should look." And we always say, people, "I'm Lithuanian, I go to Lithuanian yeshiva." Lithuania is not that big. The Chofetz Chaim, they say, "He's a Lithuanian." He's not a Lithuanian rabbi. Chofetz Chaim lives in Poland. How do you make him Lithuanian? The Lithuania, my wife, the Hasidim have a joke. The flag of Lithuania was a horse standing on its back legs. And they say, why is the horse standing on its back legs? Because if you put down his front legs, already he'd be in a different country. Lithuania is a very small place. Somehow, though, very small groups. I told you, Satmar Hasidim. They're not they may be a big group of Hasidim, but compared to the rest of the Jewish people, they're not a majority of the Jewish people. How they dictated for the rest of us to look at Eretz Yisrael. I once gave a class here on the laws of Mashiach. Baruch Hashem, I have to tell you that I think Chabad made a lot of awareness in this generation about the idea of Mashiach. But it's not a secret to you that our approach of the Sfaradim and the approach of Chabad are very different about how we believe in the Mashiach. And it's amazing to me how a small group of Hasidim have influenced the rest of the Jewish community on how they should believe in Mashiach. There are a lot of things like this. The Mekubalim are a small group. They influence the rest of the Jewish community to believe in all kinds of things. And I feel that in this generation, the idea of Eretz Yisrael, of Zionism, of the great gift of the state of Israel that HaKadosh gave us, it's not a political thing, it's a religious thing. But what has happened is there are elements, fringe elements of the religious community, which have hijacked this conversation, and essentially caused all of us to either feel defensive, or to not even know that there's a whole other side of this equation. And B'ezrat Hashem, in the next 2 weeks, I wish to show you that the foundation on which these people built their ideology is not even a foundation. It would be illegal to build a building. It doesn't stand up to code. It doesn't have any foundation. It's like you want to build a house without putting a cement foundation. How much it costs to put a cement foundation in a house?
Like 23 to 30,000.
What if I want to skip it? I don't want to waste the money.
So you must be out of your mind.
So huffing and puffing, you're going to blow the house down. They built entire ideologies on a house with no foundation.
Wow.
It's very easy for us to blow it down. And B'ezrat Hashem, for the next 2 weeks, that's what we'll do.